A beggar boy finds a millionaire crying in front of his dead wife's tomb and whispers, "Don't cry, Daddy." The man is shocked to hear those words and see similarities in the boy's face. He decides to investigate, and what he discovers will surprise you. If this story interested you, subscribe to our channel, don't forget to like this video, and tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. The autumn wind whispered through the cypress trees as Alexander Morgan stood alone in the garden of memories, his expensive Italian shoes sinking slightly into the damp grass. His tall figure, usually commanding and confident in the boardrooms of New York's highest towers, seemed somehow diminished against the backdrop of marble monuments and carefully tended flowers. The carefully pressed suit that had cost more than some people's monthly salary couldn't hide the slight tremor in his shoulders as he placed a bouquet of white roses before Sarah's final resting place. "I should have been there more," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the rustling leaves. The words felt hollow, inadequate against the weight of everything left unsaid during their 15 years of marriage. Each visit to this peaceful garden was a reminder of his failures, of all the dinner dates cancelled for business meetings, of all the vacations postponed for urgent deals, of all the moments lost to the relentless pursuit of success. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the garden, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Alexander traced his fingers over the cool marble, remembering Sarah's last smile, the way she had tried to tell him something important that final morning, but he had been too busy checking his phone, too preoccupied with a merger that now seemed meaningless. "Mr. Morgan," a soft voice interrupted his reverie. Alexander turned to find James, his driver, standing respectfully at a distance. "Sir, the board meeting is in 30 minutes. Alexander nodded, his jaw tightening. Even now, the demands of his empire pulled at him, an endless stream of responsibilities that had once seemed so crucial. He straightened his tie, a gesture as automatic as breathing, and took one last look at the marble monument. The drive back to the city was silent, the luxury car's interior forming a bubble of solitude around him. Through the tinted windows, he watched the streets of New York slide past, a blur of life and motion that felt increasingly distant from his own existence. His phone buzzed continuously with messages and emails, each one a reminder of the world he had chosen over everything else. The Morgan Tower rose before them, 80 stories of glass and steel reaching into the sky, a monument to his success and perhaps his greatest failure. As he stepped into his private elevator, Alexander caught a glimpse of his reflection in the polished doors. At 45, he still cut an impressive figure, but there was something different in his eyes now, a haunted quality that all his wealth couldn't erase. His executive suite occupied the entire top floor, a space larger than most homes, decorated with an art collection worth millions. But lately, it felt more like a cage than a symbol of achievement. He moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city he had helped shape. The view that had once filled him with pride now only emphasized his solitude. The board meeting passed in a blur of presentations and projections. Alexander went through the motions, making decisions worth millions with the same detachment he now felt toward everything. His colleagues noticed the change in him, the way his legendary focus had shifted, but none dared to mention it. As the sun set over Manhattan, casting long shadows between the skyscrapers, Alexander remained in his office. The cleaning staff had long since finished their rounds, and the building had fallen into that peculiar silence that only comes in the hours between day and night. He sat at his desk, surrounded by the trappings of success, feeling more lost than he ever had when building his empire from nothing. A soft knock at his door startled him from his thoughts. "Mr. Morgan?" His assistant's voice was hesitant. "There's someone here to see you." Alexander frowned. He hadn't scheduled any late meetings. "Send them away, Patricia. It's after hours." "Sir." There was something unusual in Patricia's tone that made him look up. "It's a young boy," he says. "He says it's important." Before Alexander could respond, a small figure slipped past Patricia into the office. The boy couldn't have been more than 12, dressed in simple, worn clothes that seemed out of place in the luxurious surroundings. But it was his eyes that caught Alexander's attention, deep brown eyes that seemed somehow familiar, filled with a wisdom beyond his years. The boy stood before his desk, calm and unintimidated by the trappings of wealth around him. When he spoke, his voice was clear and steady, carrying words that would change everything. "Hello, Father." The word father hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that Alexander's mind refused to process. He stared at the boy, taking in features that now seemed to shift and change before his eyes, revealing traces of Sarah he had somehow missed at first glance. The shape of the nose, the curve of the cheeks, the determined set of the jaw. It was like seeing a ghost materialize from his memories. "That's impossible," Alexander finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "There must be some mistake." But even as he spoke the words, something deep within him recognized their hollowness. The boy's eyes, Sarah's eyes, held him with an unwavering gaze that seemed to look straight through his defenses. Patricia still stood in the doorway, uncertain whether to stay or go. Alexander waved her away with a trembling hand, not taking his eyes off the young figure before him. As the door closed softly behind her, the silence in the office grew thick with unspoken questions. "My name is Thomas," the boy said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "And I've been watching you for a while now." He moved closer to the desk, his movements carrying a peculiar grace that reminded Alexander painfully of Sarah. "Mom told me about you before she had to go away." Alexander's legs felt weak. He sank back into his chair, his mind racing through memories, searching for signs he might have missed. "Sarah never told me," he began, but the words trailed off as realization began to dawn. That last morning, the way she had tried to tell him something important, the letter she had started to mention before he had cut her off with a phone call. Thomas pulled a worn envelope from his jacket pocket. "She left this for you. I was supposed to wait longer, but..." He paused, glancing around the vast office with its view of the glittering city. "I couldn't watch you suffer alone anymore." With trembling fingers, Alexander took the envelope. He recognized Sarah's handwriting immediately, the elegant slope of the letters, the way she crossed her T's with a slight flourish. The paper felt worn, as if it had been handled many times, though the seal remained unbroken. "How long have you known?" Alexander asked, his voice hoarse. "All my life," Thomas replied simply. "Mom made sure I knew who you were, even if we couldn't be together. I grew up with stories about you. Not the businessman everyone knows, but the man she fell in love with, the one who used to dream about changing the world." Alexander's throat tightened. He remembered that version of himself, the young entrepreneur, full of ideals and passion, before success had slowly transformed him into something harder, more focused on profits than people. Sarah had loved that younger version of him, had believed in his dreams even when they meant sacrificing their time together. "Where have you been all this time?" The question came out more sharply than he intended, tinged with the pain of lost years. "With Aunt Claire, Mom's cousin, in Boston." Thomas moved to the window, looking out at the city with a contemplative expression that seemed far too mature for his age. "She's taken good care of me, but Mom always said there would come a time when you would need me more than I needed to. Stay hidden." Alexander stood, moving to join Thomas at the window. The city stretched out before them, a glittering tapestry of lights that had once represented everything he thought he wanted. Now standing beside this boy, his son, it all seemed somehow less important. "Why now?" he asked softly. Thomas turned to look at him, and in that moment, Alexander saw not just Sarah's features, but something of himself as well. The same determination, the same intensity he had once possessed before success had dulled its edges. "Because," Thomas said, "everyone deserves a second chance at family, even billionaires who've forgotten how to live." He held out his hand, a gesture so simple yet filled with possibility. "Will you take that chance, Father?" The question echoed in the vast office, carrying with it the weight of past mistakes and future possibilities. Alexander looked at the offered hand, then at the letter still clutched in his own. In that moment, he realized that while he couldn't change the past, the future still held possibilities he had never imagined. Alexander's hands trembled as he opened Sarah's letter in his study, the morning sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse. Thomas sat quietly in a leather armchair across from him, his presence both comforting and unsettling. The boy's patience seemed infinite, a trait that couldn't have come from Alexander's side of the family. The familiar scent of Sarah's perfume still clung faintly to the paper, bringing with it a rush of memories that made his heart ache. As he unfolded the letter, her elegant handwriting filled his vision. "My dearest Alexander, if you're reading this, then our son has finally found the courage to reach out to you. Yes, our son." Those words still feel strange to write, even after all these years of keeping this secret. "I know you must be angry, confused, and hurt. You have every right to be. But please, read this letter until the end, before you make any judgments. Thomas was born from our love, during that summer before we were married, when everything seemed possible, and we were just two dreamers with nothing but hopes for the future. When I discovered I was pregnant, you were in the middle of launching your first company. You were working 18-hour days, pursuing your dreams with such intensity that I feared our child would become an obstacle to your success. I made the decision to hide my pregnancy, telling myself it was for your own good. Claire, my cousin, agreed to raise Thomas while keeping him close enough that I could be part of his life. It was the hardest decision I've ever made, but watching you build your empire, I convinced myself it was right. But I was wrong, Alexander. So terribly wrong. Every time I saw Thomas grow, every milestone I witnessed in secret, I felt the weight of my choice. He has your determination, your spark of brilliance, and my stubborn heart. He's the perfect blend of us both. I've spent years trying to find the right moment to tell you, but as your success grew, the walls between us grew too. The man I fell in love with, who used to talk about changing the world, became consumed by board meetings and profit margins. I watched you transform into someone who measured everything in terms of business value, and I feared that if I told you about Thomas then, you would see him as another asset to manage, rather than a son to love. Alexander paused in his reading, looking up at Thomas, who sat quietly watching him. The boy's composure was remarkable, but Alexander could see the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers gripped the armrests just a little too tightly. "Would you like some water?" Alexander asked, his voice rough with emotion. Thomas shook his head. "Please continue reading. Mom said every word was important." Alexander returned to the letter, his heart pounding. "But Thomas deserves to know his father, and you deserve to know your son. More than that, you need each other. I've watched you both from different angles of life, you losing yourself in the pursuit of success, and Thomas growing up with a piece of his heart missing. You both carry the same loneliness, the same unspoken questions. I've told Thomas stories about you, not the business magnate in the newspapers, but the man who once spent an entire night explaining to me why the stars shine differently on clear nights. The man who wanted to build things that would make the world better, not just richer. That man is still inside you, Alexander, buried beneath years of boardroom decisions and market analyses. Thomas has inherited your gift for seeing possibilities where others see only obstacles, but he's also inherited my ability to see into people's hearts. He's been watching you, learning about you, preparing himself for this moment. He's not coming to you as a burden or a responsibility, but as a guide to help you find your way back to yourself. I know this revelation will shake the foundations of your carefully ordered world, but sometimes, Alexander, the things that disrupt our plans are exactly what we need to truly live again. Thomas is not just our son. He's a second chance for both of you to have the family you deserve. The choice of what to do with this truth lies in your hands now, but remember this: success built on loneliness is no success at all. The empire you've built means nothing if there's no one to share it with, no one to remind you why you started building in the first place. Alexander's vision blurred as he read the last lines of Sarah's letter. He looked up at Thomas, seeing him clearly for the first time, not as an interruption to his life, but as a continuation of his and Sarah's love story, a bridge between his past and future. "There's more," Thomas said softly, reaching into his backpack. He pulled out a worn photo album, its edges softened by years of handling. "Mum kept this. She said you might want to see what you missed, so you'd understand what you could still have." The photo album lay open between them on Alexander's mahogany desk, each page revealing moments of a life he should have known. Thomas's first steps, captured in slightly blurry photographs that spoke of spontaneous joy. His first day of school, wearing a backpack almost as big as he was, with Sarah's handwriting noting the date on the back. Birthday parties, Halloween costumes, school plays. A childhood documented with loving attention to detail. "Your mother," Alexander's voice caught. "She was there for all of these?" Thomas nodded, carefully turning a page. "She would visit as often as she could. Sometimes she'd stay with us for days when you were away on business trips." He pointed to a photo of a science fair project, a complex solar system model that had won first prize. "She helped me build this, said I got my love for engineering from you." Alexander studied the photograph, noting the precise attention to detail in the model's construction. It was exactly the kind of project he would have thrown himself into at that age. "You built this when you were 9? 8, Thomas corrected, a hint of pride creeping into his voice. "Mom said you built your first computer at 10, so I wanted to start early." The casual mention of Sarah's stories about him sent a fresh wave of emotion through Alexander. How many times had she shared his past with their son, while he remained oblivious, buried in work just floors below his office? The weight of missed opportunities pressed down on him like a physical force. "Tell me about yourself," Alexander said suddenly, closing the album. "Not what's in these photos. Tell me who you are now." Thomas seemed surprised by the direct question, but his composure quickly returned. "I like building things," he began, his eyes lighting up with genuine enthusiasm. "Not just science projects, but solutions to problems. Last year I designed a water filtration system for my school's environmental club. It wasn't perfect, but it worked better than anyone expected." Alexander leaned forward, recognizing the spark of innovation that had driven his own early career. "What made you think of that?" "We were studying water scarcity in developing countries," Thomas explained, becoming more animated. "Everyone was just talking about how sad it was, but I kept thinking there had to be a way to help. Mom always said you started your company because you wanted to solve problems, not just make money." The mention of his company's origins struck Alexander like a physical blow. He had indeed started with the goal of creating sustainable technology solutions. But somewhere along the way, profit margins had become the primary measure of success. When had he lost sight of his original mission? "Would you like to see my latest project?" Thomas asked, reaching for his backpack again. He pulled out a worn notebook filled with detailed sketches and calculations. "I'm working on a solar-powered charging system for mobile devices. It's still mostly theoretical, but I think it could work." Alexander accepted the notebook, scanning the pages with growing amazement. The designs were rough, but showed remarkable insight for a 12-year-old. More than that, they reminded him of his own early notebooks, filled with dreams of changing the world through innovation. "These are impressive," he said softly, turning the pages with care. "Have you shown these to anyone else?" Thomas shook his head. "Just Aunt Claire, but she doesn't really understand the technical stuff. Mom used to..." He paused, swallowing hard. "She used to say I should wait to show you until we met. She said you'd understand." The simple faith in that statement hit Alexander hard. Sarah had maintained his image as a mentor and innovator to their son, even as he had lost sight of those qualities himself. She had preserved the best parts of him in Thomas's mind, giving their son a father to look up to even in absence. "I would like to understand," Alexander said carefully, closing the notebook. Perhaps we could look at these designs together. I have some experience in solar technology that might be helpful." The smile that broke across Thomas's face was like sunshine after rain, transforming his serious expression into something that reminded Alexander painfully of Sarah's joy when she was truly happy. "Really? You mean it?" "Yes," Alexander replied, surprised to find himself smiling in return. "But first, I think we need to discuss some changes. This office isn't the place for this conversation." He stood, making a decision that would have seemed impossible just days ago. Would you like to see where I live? Where you could live, if you want to. The elevator ride to Alexander's penthouse was silent, filled with the gentle hum of machinery and unspoken questions. Thomas stood close to the glass wall, watching the city shrink beneath them as they ascended to the top of Morgan Tower. His reflection in the polished surface showed none of the awe most people expressed when seeing the view for the first time. Instead, his eyes held a thoughtful intensity that reminded Alexander of board meetings and critical decisions. "Your mother," Alexander began, then paused, choosing his words carefully. "Did she ever tell you why I built this tower?" Thomas turned from the view, his expression curious. "She said it was your dream to have the tallest building in the city." "That's what the newspapers wrote," Alexander said, a sad smile playing at his lips. "The truth is, I built it because Sarah once mentioned how beautiful the sunset looked from high places. I wanted to give her the best view in New York." He touched the glass gently. "I spent so much time making sure the building was perfect, I forgot why I was building it in the first place." The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse foyer, revealing a space that managed to be both imposing and somehow empty. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan, while modern art pieces worth millions adorned the walls. Yet there was something sterile about the perfection, as if the space were more showroom than home. "It's very clean," Thomas observed diplomatically, his eyes taking in the minimalist furniture and spotless surfaces. Alexander laughed, the sound surprising even himself. "That's one way to put it. I haven't changed anything since." He caught himself, redirecting the conversation. "Would you like to see something special?" He led Thomas through the main living area to a door that seemed oddly out of place among the modern decor. It was solid wood, intricately carved with patterns of leaves and vines. Alexander's hand hesitated on the handle before he pushed it open, revealing a room that could have belonged in another house entirely. Unlike the stark modernity of the rest of the penthouse, this room was warm and lived in. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with well-worn volumes ranging from classic literature to scientific journals. A comfortable reading chair sat beside a window, a hand-knitted throw draped across its back. On the desk, family photos shared, space with half-finished sketches and engineering diagrams. "This was your mother's study," Alexander said softly. "I haven't changed anything in here. Sometimes I come in just to..." He trailed off, moving to the desk and picking up one of the sketches. "She was brilliant, you know. She had degrees in both environmental science and architecture. She used to joke that she could design buildings that would save the world." Thomas moved to stand beside him, examining the sketch. It showed a building, design unlike anything in the current skyline. Organic curves blending with practical functionality, covered in vertical gardens and solar panels. "Mom showed me some of her designs," he said. "She said they were too ahead of their time." "She was right about that," Alexander replied, setting the sketch down carefully. "The board thought her ideas were too expensive, too risky. I should have fought harder for them." He turned to Thomas, his expression serious. "But maybe it's not too late. Would you like to see something else she designed?" Alexander moved to a filing cabinet in the corner, pulling out a large roll of blueprints. As he spread them across the desk, Thomas's eyes widened. The drawings showed a comprehensive plan for transforming Morgan Tower into an environmental innovation center, complete with renewable energy systems, urban farming spaces, and educational facilities. She finished these just before Alexander swallowed hard. She called it the Morgan Legacy Project. The note she attached said it was meant to be a bridge between business success and social responsibility, a way to show that profit and purpose could work together. Thomas studied the blueprints with intense concentration, his fingers tracing the lines of his mother's vision. "These could work," he said finally, looking up at Alexander. "The technology exists now. Some of it's even better than what she planned for." Alexander watched his son analyze the designs with growing amazement. The boy's understanding of the technical aspects was impressive, but it was his grasp of the larger vision that struck home. Thomas didn't just see blueprints, he saw possibilities, just as Sarah always had. "Would you like to help make it happen?" Alexander asked, the words coming out before he could second-guess them. "Your mother's legacy, your ideas, my resources. We could build something that matters." For the first time since their meeting, Thomas's composed facade cracked slightly, revealing the hopeful child beneath. "You mean work together? Actually build it?" "Yes," Alexander said, feeling more certain with each word. "But first, we need to make some changes. Starting with this penthouse, it's time to make it a home again." The news of Thomas's existence spread through Morgan Enterprises like wildfire. By Monday morning, the executive floor was buzzing with whispered conversations and speculative glances. Patricia, Alexander's longtime assistant, found herself acting as a buffer between her boss and the growing tide of curiosity and concern. The board members were particularly agitated. They had watched Alexander's recent withdrawal from day-to-day operations with increasing anxiety, and now this unexpected development threatened to further destabilize the company's leadership. Emergency meetings were called, risk assessments were demanded, and PR teams were put on high alert. Alexander, however, seemed transformed. He arrived at the office early that Monday, wearing a smile that hadn't been seen in months. The morning's board meeting was scheduled to start in 10 minutes, and for the first time in years, he wasn't reviewing quarterly reports or checking market projections. Instead, he was studying Sarah's blueprints for the Morgan Legacy project, making notes in the margins. "Mr. Morgan," Patricia appeared in his doorway, her expression carefully neutral. "The board is assembled. They're quite eager to discuss recent developments." Alexander looked up from the blueprints, his smile unwavering. "I imagine they are. Patricia, could you do me a favor? Have maintenance clear out the empty office next to mine, the one we were going to use for the expansion team." "Sir?" Patricia's professional mask slipped slightly, revealing her surprise. "Thomas will need a space to work when he's here after school," Alexander explained, gathering the blueprints. "Nothing too formal, just somewhere he can tinker with his projects while I finish up for the day." Patricia's features softened. In 15 years of working for Alexander Morgan, she had never seen him prioritize family over business. "Of course, sir. I'll see to it personally." The boardroom fell silent as Alexander entered, 14 pairs of eyes watching him with varying degrees of concern and curiosity. Richard Blackwood, the head of the board and Alexander's longest-standing business partner, stood at the head of the table. "Alexander," Richard began, his tone carefully measured, "we understand you've had some personal revelations recently. The board is naturally concerned about how this might affect company operations." Alexander laid the blueprints on the table, smoothing them out deliberately before speaking. "Gentlemen, ladies, I'm about to show you something that will change the future of Morgan Enterprises. But first, yes, let's address the elephant in the room. I have a son. His name is Thomas. He's 12 years old and he's brilliant." "Alex," Richard interrupted, "no one doubts that this is a significant personal matter, but the company is about to evolve," Alexander cut in, his voice firm but energized. "Sarah, my late wife, left us a legacy that we've ignored for too long. These blueprints represent a complete reimagining of what Morgan Enterprises could be." He began explaining Sarah's vision for the Morgan Legacy project, watching as skepticism gradually gave way to interest among some board members. The younger executives in particular leaned forward as he described the potential for combining profitable innovation with environmental responsibility. "This is more than just a building renovation," Alexander continued. "It's a statement about who we are and what we stand for. The technology sector is changing. The next generation, my son's generation, won't be satisfied with profit at any cost. They want purpose alongside prosperity." "The costs would be astronomical," one of the directors objected. "Shareholders would never approve." "I own 51% of this company," Alexander reminded them quietly. "And I'm prepared to fund the initial phase personally, but more importantly, I have something we've been lacking, a fresh perspective." He pressed a button on his phone. "Patricia, could you send him in?" The boardroom doors opened and Thomas entered. He was wearing a proper suit this time, though his notebook was still tucked under his arm. The board members watched in stunned silence as this child walked confidently to stand beside his father. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alexander said, placing a hand on Thomas's shoulder, "I'd like you to meet the future of Morgan Enterprises." Thomas has already identified several improvements to his mother's original designs, incorporating cutting-edge technologies that didn't exist when these plans were drawn. Thomas opened his notebook and, without a trace of nervousness, began explaining his modifications to the solar collection systems and water recycling infrastructure. His clear understanding of both the technical details and their practical applications left even the most skeptical board members exchanging impressed glances. "We're not just building a sustainable building," Thomas concluded, looking around the table with those eerily familiar eyes. "We're creating a template for future development. If it works here, it can work anywhere." Alexander watched his son with undisguised pride, seeing in him not just Sarah's compassion and his own drive, but something entirely new, a bridge between the world of profit they had built and the world of purpose they could create. Claire Bennett sat in Alexander's living room, her posture rigid despite the comfortable surroundings. The sunset painted the Manhattan skyline in shades of gold and purple through the floor-to-ceiling windows, but her attention was fixed solely on the man across from her. The woman who had raised Thomas for 12 years had finally come to confront the father who was now claiming his place in the boy's life. "He's not ready for this world," Claire said, gesturing to the luxurious penthouse around them. "Thomas is a sensitive child. He needs stability, not—" She paused, searching for the right words. "Not grand gestures and corporate adventures." Alexander remained calm, though his fingers tightened slightly around his coffee cup. "I understand your concerns, Claire. You've been his guardian, his protector, but he's my son. A fact you've only known about for 2 weeks, Claire countered, her voice sharp. "I've been there for every scraped knee, every nightmare, every school play. Where were you?" "I didn't know," Alexander replied quietly. If you had known, what would have been different?" Claire leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Sarah watched you for years, Alexander. She saw how you changed, how the business became everything. Do you think she didn't want to tell you she was protecting Thomas from becoming another asset in your portfolio?" The words struck home, harder than Alexander expected. He stood, walking to the windows to gather his thoughts. Below, the city buzzed with evening traffic, thousands of lives intersecting and separating in endless patterns. Somewhere down there, Thomas was in his new office, working on his latest project, completely unaware of this conversation. "You're right," Alexander finally said, turning back to Claire. "I lost my way. The business consumed me, and I failed. Sarah in ways I'm only beginning to understand. But Thomas—" He paused, a small smile touching his lips. "Thomas reminds me of who I used to be, of why I started all of this in the first place. He's not your redemption project, Alexander," Claire warned. "He's a child who's already lost his mother. I won't let him be hurt again." "No," Alexander agreed, surprising her. "He's not a project. He's my son, and he's teaching me more than I could ever teach him. Did you know he's already improved on Sarah's environmental systems? The board was impressed enough to approve initial funding for the legacy project." Claire's expression softened slightly. "He showed me his notebooks. I never understood half of what he was designing, but his enthusiasm, it reminded me of Sarah. He has her heart," Alexander said softly, "and her vision. But he also has something I lost along the way, the ability to see beyond profit margins to real purpose." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Patricia entered, looking apologetic. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Morgan, but Thomas is asking for you. He says he's made a breakthrough with the solar collection system." Alexander looked at Claire, a question in his eyes. She stood, smoothing her skirt with practiced precision. "Go," she said, her voice carrying a mix of resignation and hope. "But remember what I said. He's not just an heir to your empire, Alexander. He's a boy who needs a father. Would you like to come with me?" Alexander offered. "See what he's working on?" Claire hesitated, then nodded. Together, They took the elevator down to Thomas's office. The space, once sterile and corporate, had been transformed in just 2 weeks. Technical drawings covered the walls, and a large workbench dominated one corner, covered in what looked like miniature solar panels and circuit boards. Thomas barely looked up as they entered, his attention focused on a complex diagram spread across his desk. "Dad, I figured it out," he exclaimed, still drawing. "If we adjust the angle of the panels seasonally and incorporate these new photovoltaic cells, we can increase efficiency by at least 30%. Claire watched as Alexander moved to stand behind his son, examining the drawings with genuine interest. The boy's excitement was infectious, and even she had to admit there was something special happening here. Thomas was flourishing in ways she hadn't expected. "Show me," Alexander said, pulling up a chair. As Thomas launched into a detailed explanation, Claire noticed something she hadn't seen before: the way they mirrored each other's gestures, the shared intensity in their eyes when discussing technical details, the natural flow of their conversation. She slipped out quietly, leaving father and son absorbed in their work. In the elevator, she pulled out her phone and looked at the last message Sarah had sent her. "When the time comes, trust that love will find its way." Maybe, Claire thought, Sarah had seen something in both of them that was only now coming to light. The Morgan Tower cafeteria fell silent as Alexander walked in with Thomas for lunch, an unprecedented event that sent ripples of surprise through the corporate hierarchy. The CEO had never been seen in the employee dining area before, preferring his private dining room or business lunches at exclusive restaurants. Thomas, carrying his own lunch bag that Claire had packed, seemed oblivious to the attention. He chatted animatedly about his morning's work, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet space. "The maintenance team showed me the building's current solar array. It's so inefficient, Dad. We could triple the output with just a few modifications." They settled at a table near the window, ignoring the stares and whispers around them. Alexander found himself oddly enjoying the break from protocol. "Tell me more about these modifications," he said, unwrapping his own sandwich. Another. First for the CEO, known for his fine dining habits. A young woman approached their table, clutching a tablet to her chest. Her badge identified her as Emily Chen, Environmental Systems Engineer. "Excuse me, Mr. Morgan," she began nervously. "I couldn't help overhearing. I've actually been working on some similar modifications to the solar array design." Instead of dismissing her as most employees would have expected, Alexander gestured to an empty chair. "Please join us. Thomas would love to hear your ideas." The tension in the cafeteria began to dissolve as other employees watched this unexpected scene unfold. Emily pulled up her designs on her tablet, and soon she and Thomas were deep in discussion about energy efficiency and sustainable design. "See? This part here?" Thomas pointed to a section of Emily's drawings. "That's similar to what Mom designed for the original building, but you've improved the collection matrix." Emily's eyes widened. "Your mother designed the original system, but that was revolutionary for its time. We still use some of those principles in modern installations." Alexander watched the exchange with growing interest. He had hired Emily 2 years ago, but had never actually spoken with her. Now he discovered she had been developing exactly the kind of innovations they needed for the legacy project. "Emily," he interrupted their technical discussion, "how would you like to join the legacy project team? We could use someone with your expertise." The young engineer stared at him in shock. "The legacy project? But that's, I mean, I'm just a junior engineer." "You're exactly what we need," Thomas said earnestly. "Your ideas about thermal energy storage could solve our nighttime efficiency problems." More employees had begun drifting toward their table, drawn by the unusual scene and the animated discussion. A maintenance supervisor named Jim offered insights about the building's current systems. An accounting intern nervously suggested ways to track the project's environmental impact in financial terms. Alexander sat back, watching as his son naturally drew people into the conversation, breaking down the hierarchical barriers that had always defined corporate culture. Thomas didn't see titles or positions. He saw ideas and possibilities. "Mr. Morgan?" A voice interrupted his thoughts. He turned to find Richard Blackwood, the board chairman, standing behind him. "I came down to remind you about the 2 o'clock meeting, but..." He gestured to the impromptu gathering. "Perhaps we should reschedule." Alexander stood, leading Richard slightly away from the group. "Look at them, Richard. This is what we've been missing. Real innovation doesn't happen in boardrooms. It happens when people feel free to share their ideas." Richard watched as Thomas sketched something on Emily's tablet, his enthusiasm infectious as other employees leaned in to see. "He's certainly stirring things up," the chairman admitted. "The old guard isn't happy about these changes." "But the old guard isn't happy about anything that threatens their comfort," Alexander replied. "But tell me honestly, when was the last time you saw this kind of energy in the building?" Before Richard could answer, Thomas called out, "Dad, Emily figured out how to increase the solar storage capacity by 40%. Can she show you?" Alexander turned back to Richard with a slight smile. "Join us? You might be surprised by what you learn." The chairman hesitated, then loosened his tie slightly. "Why not? It's been years since I had lunch in the cafeteria." As they rejoined the group, Alexander noticed how the earlier tension had completely evaporated. Employees who normally wouldn't dare approach him were now freely sharing ideas, encouraged by Thomas's genuine interest and enthusiasm. Emily was explaining a complex energy storage system, her earlier nervousness replaced by professional confidence. "If we implement these changes alongside Thomas's collection, improvements, we could make Morgan Tower the most energy-efficient building in the city." "Not just efficient," Thomas added, his eyes shining with excitement. "We could produce enough excess energy to support the surrounding buildings." Mom's original design included a community power-sharing system. Alexander watched his son, feeling a profound sense of pride and wonder. In just 2 weeks, Thomas had done more than just adapt to his new life. He had begun transforming the very culture of Morgan Enterprises, one conversation at a time. The weekend arrived with an unfamiliar quietness in the penthouse. Alexander stood in the kitchen, attempting to make pancakes for the first time in years. The smell of slightly burned batter filled the air as he flipped another misshapen creation onto a growing stack. "You're supposed to wait for the bubbles to form before flipping them," Thomas said, watching from his perch at the kitchen island. He had spent his first night in the penthouse, in a room that Alexander had hurriedly prepared, trying to make it feel welcoming despite its pristine newness. "Your mother used to say the same thing," Alexander replied, smiling at the memory. "She was the breakfast expert in our house. I was usually gone before dawn, heading to the office." Thomas slid off his stool and moved to stand beside his father at the stove. "Here, let me show you. Aunt Claire taught me." He took the spatula, demonstrating the proper technique with practiced ease. "See? Wait for the bubbles, then flip gently." Alexander watched his son cook, noting how confident he seemed in the kitchen. It was yet another aspect of Thomas's life he had missed, another skill learned without him. "What else did Aunt Claire teach you?" "Lots of things," Thomas said, sliding a perfectly golden pancake onto a plate. "She said everyone should know how to take care of themselves, no matter how much money they have. She taught me to cook, do laundry, even basic sewing." The mention of Claire brought a thoughtful expression to Alexander's face. Their conversation from earlier in the week still weighed on his mind. "She's done an amazing job raising you." Thomas paused in his cooking, looking up at his father. "She did her best, but she always told me stories about you and Mom, about how you used to be before." He trailed off, uncertain how to continue. "Before I lost my way?" Alexander suggested gently. Thomas nodded, returning to the pancakes. "She has all these photos of you and Mom when you were younger. There's one where you're both sitting on the hood of this old car looking at the stars. Mom's laughing, and you're pointing at something in the sky." Alexander's heart clenched at the memory. "The meteor shower. We drove hours to find a dark spot outside the city. Your mother insisted we bring a telescope, but we ended up just lying there watching the stars fall." "Why did you stop doing things like that?" Thomas asked, his voice careful but curious. Alexander moved to the window, looking out at the city he had helped shape. "Success is like quicksand sometimes. The more you achieve, the more it pulls you in. Every deal led to another deal, every project to a bigger project. Before I knew it, I was running an empire, but had forgotten why I started building it in the first place. Was it worth it? The question was simple but loaded with meaning. No, Alexander answered honestly. None of it was worth losing the things that mattered most. He turned back to his son. But maybe it's not too late to remember what's important. Thomas finished the last pancake and turned off the stove. Mom's project is important, he said, but not just the building part. She wanted to change how people think about success. Alexander helped Thomas carry the plates to the dining table, where they sat side by side instead of at opposite ends. Tell me more about that. Well, Thomas began, drizzling maple syrup over his pancakes. In her notes, she wrote about creating spaces that bring people together, not just efficient buildings. The Legacy Project isn't just about green energy. It's about showing that business can do good things for communities. Like the cafeteria the other day, Alexander mused, when everyone started sharing ideas. Exactly, Thomas's eyes lit up. Emily's solar designs and Jim's maintenance knowledge, they're all parts of the same puzzle. Mom called it collaborative innovation in her notes. They ate in comfortable silence for a moment before Thomas spoke again. Dad, there's something else in Mom's notes that I think you should see. He retrieved his backpack from beside the couch and pulled out a worn journal. I found this when I was going through her things at Aunt Claire's. It's different from her other notebooks, more personal. Alexander accepted the journal with trembling hands. The leather cover was soft with age and use. The pages filled with Sarah's familiar handwriting. As he opened it, a photograph slipped out. The very one Thomas had mentioned, of him and Sarah watching the meteor shower. She wrote about that night, Thomas said softly. About how you both made wishes on the falling stars. She wished for a family that would change the world together. Alexander traced the edge of the photograph with his finger. I wished for success, he admitted. I promised her I'd build something meaningful, something that would last. He looked up at his son, seeing Sarah's hope and his own determination reflected in those eyes. I just didn't understand what meaningful really meant until now. Thomas smiled, a gesture so like his mother's that it made Alexander's heart ache. Maybe that's why Mom kept all her designs, even when you were too busy to look at them. She knew someday you'd remember. Remember what? That the biggest dreams aren't about buildings or money, Thomas said, quoting from the journal. They're about the people we love and the difference we make together. The Morgan Enterprises quarterly shareholders meeting was traditionally a formal affair, held in the company's grand conference center with strict protocols and predictable presentations. But this quarter was different. Alexander had insisted on holding it in the building's newly renovated atrium, where the first phase of the Legacy Project was already taking shape. Shareholders and board members mingled uncomfortably in the transformed space, where construction scaffolding was draped with living walls of vertical gardens. Emily Chen stood beside a detailed holographic display of the new solar collection system, while Jim and his maintenance team demonstrated the practical applications of the sustainable technologies being implemented. This is highly unconventional, Richard Blackwood muttered to Alexander as they watched the crowds gather. The old guard is already nervous about the changes. This might push them over the edge. Good, Alexander replied calmly. It's time they were pushed out of their comfort zones. Where's Thomas? As if on cue, Thomas emerged from behind the holographic display, tablet in hand. He was dressed in a suit that matched his father's, but with sneakers that Claire had insisted he be allowed to wear. Everything's ready, he reported. Emily's presentation is loaded and the energy efficiency demonstrations are set up. Alexander smiled at his son's professional demeanor. In the month since Thomas had entered his life, the boy had shown an remarkable ability to bridge the world of childhood and corporate responsibility. Remember, he said softly, you don't have to do this if you're not comfortable. Thomas squared his shoulders. Mom would want her project explained properly. I can do this. The meeting began with traditional financial reports, but the setting made even dry statistics seem different. Shareholders found themselves sitting on sustainable bamboo chairs, surrounded by growing things, while natural light streamed through new solar-collecting windows. When it was time for the legacy project presentation, Alexander stepped up to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, a month ago I stood before you and promised changes. Today you're sitting in the beginning of that change." He gestured to the living walls and energy displays around them. "But to truly understand where we're going, you need to understand where this vision came from." He motioned to Thomas, who joined him at the podium. A murmur went through the crowd, while rumors had spread about Alexander's son. This was the first official acknowledgement of his existence to the shareholders. "My late wife, Sarah Morgan, was more than just the woman behind the CEO," Alexander continued. "She was an architect and environmental engineer who dreamed of transforming how we think about corporate responsibility. The legacy project was her vision, and now it's being brought to life by a new generation." Thomas took his place at the podium, his tablet connecting seamlessly with the holographic display. As images of Sarah's original designs merged with new innovations, he began to explain the project with a clarity that belied his age. "The Morgan Legacy Project isn't just about making one building sustainable," Thomas explained, his voice steady. "It's about creating a template for corporate transformation. Every innovation we implement here can be adapted for other buildings, other companies, other communities." He walked the shareholders through the technical aspects, but also emphasized the human element. How the changes were already affecting employee morale and productivity. How the community engagement programs were creating positive publicity. How the sustainable systems would provide long-term cost savings. In the middle of his presentation, a shareholder interrupted. "This is all very impressive, but the costs are already showing returns," Emily stepped in, pulling up real-time data from the first phase of implementations. "The new solar array has reduced our energy costs by 23% in just 3 weeks. The living walls are improving air quality and reducing HVAC loads. And the community power sharing initiative has generated positive press worth millions in advertising value." Alexander watched as Thomas and Emily tag-teamed the presentation, addressing concerns with data and demonstrating solutions with practical examples. The shareholders' skepticism began to shift to interest, particularly when Jim's team showed the actual cost savings from the new systems. "But the most important return," Thomas concluded, pulling up a final image, the photograph of his parents, watching the meteor shower, "isn't measured in dollars. Mom used to say that true legacy isn't about what we build, but about how we inspire others to build on our foundations." The room fell silent as the image hung in the air, young Alexander and Sarah full of dreams and hope before success had complicated everything. Then, surprisingly, applause began to spread through the atrium. It wasn't the polite, corporate applause of usual shareholders' meetings, but something more genuine, more emotional. Richard Blackwood leaned over to Alexander. "I've been in business for 40 years, he said quietly, "and I've never seen anything quite like this. Your boy, he has a gift for making people believe in possibilities." Alexander nodded, watching as shareholders gathered around Thomas and Emily, asking questions and examining the demonstrations with genuine interest. "He reminds them of what we all used to be," he replied, "before we forgot why we started building in the first place." The school science fair buzzed with excitement as students, parents, and teachers moved between displays in the gymnasium. Thomas stood beside his project, a working model of the Morgan Tower's new sustainable systems, complete with miniature solar panels and a living wall demonstration. It was his first time presenting at his new school, and despite his experience with corporate shareholders, he felt butterflies in his stomach. "Will he really come?" Thomas asked Claire, who stood nearby, straightening his project display for the 3rd time. She had driven him to school early to set everything up, just as she had done for every science fair before. "He promised, didn't he?" Claire replied, though her own voice held a hint of uncertainty. Alexander Morgan had never attended a school event before, and old habits were hard to break. The judges were making their way down the line of projects, clipboards in hand, when a murmur spread through the gymnasium. Alexander Morgan, wearing a casual sweater instead of his usual suit, walked through the doors. Several parents did double takes, Recognizing the famous CEO whose face often appeared in business magazines, Thomas's face lit up as his father approached, but he maintained his professional composure. He had practiced his presentation countless times, determined to make both his parents proud, his mother through her legacy, and his father through its continuation. "Sorry I'm a bit early," Alexander said, surprising both Thomas and Claire. "The board meeting finished faster than expected. I didn't want to miss anything." Claire watched as father and son exchanged smiles, noticing how Alexander's presence seemed to boost Thomas's confidence rather than make him nervous. The boy launched into his presentation as the judges approached, explaining how the miniature systems in his model reflected the actual implementations happening in Morgan Tower. "The living walls aren't just for show," Thomas explained, pointing to the small plants growing in his vertical display. "They help regulate temperature and improve air quality. In the full-scale version we're building, they'll also provide fresh produce for the tower's cafeteria." One judge, a retired engineering professor, leaned in closer. "This is remarkably sophisticated for a middle school project. Did you have help designing this?" "The original concept came from my mother's architectural plans," Thomas replied, honestly. "But I adapted her designs to incorporate newer technology." He demonstrated how the miniature solar panels tracked light sources, maximizing energy collection, just like the full-scale versions being installed on the tower. Alexander stood back, watching his son handle questions with the same poise he had shown at the shareholders' meeting. But here, surrounded by his peers and their simple volcano models and battery experiments, Thomas seemed more relaxed, more his age. "He's thriving," Claire said softly, coming to stand beside Alexander. "I was worried about all the changes, but he's stronger than we gave him credit for," Alexander finished, just like his mother. A young girl from Thomas's class approached his display, curious about the growing plants. Instead of launching into technical details, Thomas shifted easily into kid mode, making jokes about building salad and demonstrating how the water recycling system worked by creating tiny rainbows in the light. "Mr. Morgan," a woman in a sharp suit approached Alexander. "I'm Dr. Peterson, the school principal. Could we speak privately for a moment?" Alexander followed her to a quiet corner, expecting concerns about security or media attention. Instead, she surprised him. "Thomas's project is extraordinary," she began, "but what impresses me more is how he connects with his classmates. He has a gift for making complex ideas accessible and exciting. We'd like him to consider mentoring some of our younger students in the science program." Alexander watched as Thomas now had a small crowd of students around his display, all eagerly asking questions and touching the interactive elements of his model. "He gets that from his mother," he said softly. "She could always see the human side of innovation." "The school would also be interested in discussing a possible partnership," Dr. Peterson continued. "Your legacy project aligns perfectly with our STEM initiatives. Perhaps we could arrange for some of our students to visit Morgan Tower, see the real-world applications of what they're learning." Before Alexander could respond, a cheer went up from Thomas's direction. The judges had moved on to deliberate, and his classmates were crowding around asking if they could help test the water recycling system again. "Actually," Alexander said, an idea forming, "I think we could do something even better. What would you say to having your students help design part of the legacy project? A learning garden, perhaps, or a renewable energy demonstration area?" Dr. Peterson's eyes lit up. "That would be extraordinary. The educational value would go both ways," Alexander finished, watching Thomas laugh with his new friends. "Sometimes the best innovations come from seeing things through fresh eyes." As they discussed possibilities, Claire touched Alexander's arm. "The judges are returning," she said softly. "I think they've made their decision." The gym fell quiet as the head judge stepped up to the microphone. Thomas returned to his display, standing tall between his father and aunt, both of whom placed supportive hands on his shoulders. In that moment, Alexander realized that this, not the board meetings or shareholders' presentations, was what real success felt like. The weekend retreat center nestled in the Catskills was a far cry from Morgan Tower's steel and glass environment. Alexander sat on the rustic cabin's porch, watching as Thomas and a group of other children worked on what appeared to be a complicated rope bridge across a shallow stream. The corporate family wellness weekend had been Emily's idea, a way to help employees connect outside the office and share the environmental values the company was embracing. "He's really good with them," Emily said, joining Alexander on the porch with 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one, gesturing to where Thomas was patiently showing younger children how to tie secure knots. "Hard to believe he's the same kid who presents to shareholders." Alexander accepted the coffee gratefully. "Sarah would have loved this," he said, watching as his son demonstrated proper rope tension to his attentive audience. The whole idea of bringing families together, connecting with nature, it's exactly what she envisioned for the company. "The employees are noticing the changes," Emily offered. "Not just the environmental initiatives, but the whole culture shift. People actually want to come to work now." Below them, Thomas had organized the children into teams, each responsible for different aspects of the bridge construction. Even the usually shy kids were joining in, encouraged by his inclusive leadership style. "Look at how he divided the tasks," Alexander observed. "Everyone has a role that matches their strengths. The artistic ones are designing the decorative elements, the mathematical ones are calculating rope lengths. Just like he did with the legacy project teams," Emily noted, "he has an instinct for bringing out the best in people." The bridge project was clearly more than just a children's activity. As parents began gathering to watch, Thomas explained how the bridge design incorporated principles of sustainability and teamwork. He had somehow turned a simple rope bridge into a lesson about community building and environmental responsibility. "Mr. Morgan?" A small girl, probably around 7, tugged at Alexander's sleeve. "Thomas says you know how to make the best rope swing. Will you help us after the bridge is done?" Alexander blinked in surprise. He hadn't made a rope swing since college, when he and Sarah used to escape to parks between classes. "Thomas told you that? He said you and his mom made the most amazing swing in Central Park," the girl insisted. "Please, he said you were really good at calculating the perfect arc for maximum fun and safety." Emily tried to hide her smile as Alexander stood, clearly moved by the revelation that Thomas had been sharing stories about his younger days. "Well," he said, his voice slightly rough, "we can't disappoint them, can we?" The rest of the afternoon became something Alexander would never have imagined possible a few months ago. He found himself working alongside employees and their children, sharing stories about engineering principles while helping construct an elaborate rope swing system. Thomas moved between helping his father and coordinating the bridge team, his natural ability to connect people shining through. As the sun began to set, the families gathered for a barbecue. The children proudly showed off their completed bridge, decorated with solar-powered fairy lights that Thomas had brought from his workshop. The rope swings, there were now 3 of them, had been thoroughly tested and approved by kids and adults alike. "Dad?" Thomas joined Alexander at the picnic table, his clothes slightly muddy from the day's activities. "Can we do something like this at the tower? Not the rope swings, obviously, but maybe some kind of community space where people can work together and share ideas." Alexander looked around at the scene before them. Employees who normally only saw each other in meetings were sharing food and laughing together. Children who had been strangers that morning were now planning future adventures. The artificial barriers of corporate hierarchy had melted away, replaced by genuine connections. "Actually," he said, "I think we can do better than that. What if we expanded the Legacy project to include a community innovation center, a place where employees' families, local schools and community groups could come together to work on sustainable projects?" Thomas's eyes lit up. "Like a bigger version of the school partnership? We could have workshops and demonstration areas, and maybe even a garden like this." "Your mother's original plans included something similar," Alexander remembered. "She called it the heart of innovation, a space where business and community could grow together." Emily, who had overheard their conversation, joined them. "The atrium renovation is almost complete," she said. "With some modifications, we could incorporate a community space into the next phase." As they discussed possibilities, Alexander watched Thomas sketch ideas on a napkin. his expression identical to Sarah's when she was deep in creative mode. The boy had somehow managed to inherit not just their best qualities, but their shared dream of using success to make a meaningful difference. "You know what this means, don't you?" Thomas looked up from his sketch with a mischievous smile. "We're going to need a really big rope bridge." The laughter that followed was genuine and warm, echoing across the retreat center's grounds. Alexander realized that while he had spent years building an empire of steel and glass, his son was teaching him how to build something far more valuable: bridges between people, between ideas, between the world that was and the world that could be. The discovery happened on a rainy Sunday afternoon. Thomas was helping Alexander sort through boxes in Sarah's study, organizing her papers and designs for the Legacy Project's archives. The room had become their shared sanctuary, a place where Sarah's presence felt strongest and most comforting. "Dad, look at this," Thomas called out, pulling an old leather briefcase from behind a filing cabinet. The case was covered in dust, but still intact, its brass clasps tarnished but functional. "I've never seen this before." Alexander crossed the room, his heart skipping a beat as he recognized the briefcase. "That was your mother's thesis project case. She carried it everywhere during our last year of college." He ran his fingers over the worn leather. "I can't believe she kept it all these years." Together they placed the briefcase on Sarah's desk. The clasps opened with a soft click, revealing a treasure trove of papers, photographs, and drawings. But what caught their attention immediately was a thick envelope addressed to "My Two Dreamers." "It's Mum's handwriting," Thomas said softly, picking up the envelope. He looked at his father questioningly. Alexander nodded, his throat tight. "With emotion. Open it." Inside were several letters and a small USB drive. The first letter was dated just weeks before Sarah's departure, its pages filled with her distinctive script. "My dearest Alexander and Thomas, if you're reading this together, then my greatest hope has been realized. You've found each other, and more importantly, you've found your way back to the car. Dreams we once shared. Alexander, my love, do you remember that night under the meteor shower when we planned our future? You talked about building towers that would touch the sky, and I dreamed of creating spaces that would bring people together. We were so young, so full of possibilities. Somewhere along the way, the towers became more important than the connections they were meant to create. But I never lost faith in the man who once spent hours explaining constellations to me. The man who believed that success meant making the world better, not just richer. That man is still there, and our son has helped you remember him. Thomas, my brilliant boy, you've carried such a heavy secret for so long. I watched you grow from afar, seeing your father's determination and my dreams combine in ways I never imagined possible. You were never a mistake or a complication. You were the bridge we needed, even if we didn't know it at the time. On the USB drive, you'll find my complete vision for what Morgan Enterprises could become. Not just the Legacy Project as you know it, but a 20-year plan for transforming corporate responsibility. There are designs for sustainable communities, educational partnerships, and innovation centers that could change how businesses interact with the world. But the most important files aren't the blueprints or proposals. They're the personal photos and videos I've collected over the years. Moments of both of you that show how alike you've always been. Thomas solving his first engineering puzzle at age 6, Alexander presenting his first sustainable design in college. Two dreamers, separated by time but connected by the same passion for making a difference. I've also included letters I wrote to both of you over the years. Some are celebrations of your achievements, others are thoughts I wished I could share in person. They're not meant to bring sadness, but to help you understand why I made the choices I did and how much love guided every decision. Alexander, you'll find the original sketches of the project that first brought us together, the solar-powered community center we designed for our senior thesis. Remember how we stayed up all night in the studio, debating the best way to integrate natural light? That passion for creating something meaningful, something that would help others, is what made me fall in love with you. Thomas, there are designs. You've never seen projects your father and I dreamed up before success changed our priorities. Study them, improve them, make them your own. Your fresh perspective and natural ability to bring people together are exactly what these ideas need to become reality. The Legacy Project isn't just about sustainable buildings or corporate responsibility. It's about remembering that the greatest innovations come from connecting hearts as well as minds. It's about building bridges between dreams and reality, between past and future, between father and son. I may not be there to see these dreams come true, but I've never doubted that they would. The love that created our family is stronger than any distance or time that has separated us. Together, you two can create something far more meaningful than I ever could alone. Take care of each other, learn from each other, and remember that sometimes the most important blueprints are the ones we draw with our hearts. All my love, Sarah. Alexander and Thomas sat in silence after reading the letter, both trying to process its contents. The rain outside had intensified, drumming against the windows in a soothing rhythm that seemed to echo Sarah's words. "Should we look at the USB drive?" Thomas asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Alexander looked at his son, seeing Sarah's hope and his own past reflected in those eyes. "Yes," he said, reaching for Sarah's laptop. "But first, I think there's something else we need to do." He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Claire, would you like to come over? There's something here you should be part of too. After all, you helped keep Sarah's dream alive all these years." Claire arrived just as the rain began to ease, carrying a box of old photo albums and wearing an expression that mixed anticipation with protective concern. The study had always been Sarah's space, and entering it now with both Alexander and Thomas waiting felt like stepping into a cherished memory. "I brought everything I saved," she said, placing the box beside Sarah's desk. "All the school projects, the science fair ribbons, the little inventions. Sarah would want them included in the archives." Alexander plugged the USB drive into Sarah's laptop, while Thomas and Claire arranged themselves on either side of him. The screen came to life with a folder structure that was quintessentially Sarah, meticulously organized with clear labels and dates. The first folder they opened contained videos. A young Sarah appeared on screen, standing in what looked like a college engineering lab. She was explaining a solar panel design to someone off camera, her hands moving animatedly as she described energy conversion rates and environmental impact. "I filmed that," Alexander said softly. "It was our first project together in advanced sustainable design. She completely transformed my understanding of environmental engineering that semester." They clicked through more videos. Sarah and Alexander at graduation, both wearing medals for academic excellence. Sarah presenting their community center design to a panel of professors. A much more recent video showed Thomas at age 7, carefully explaining his first solar-powered toy car to Claire's camera. "Mom was there that day," Thomas remembered suddenly. "I didn't know it then, but she was the visiting friend who helped me fix the wiring." Claire nodded, wiping away a tear. "She stayed up all night before that science fair, making sure she could explain any questions you might have about the electronics. She was so proud of your engineering instincts." The next folder contained Sarah's extended plans for Morgan Enterprises. The designs were breathtaking in their scope and vision. Beyond the current legacy project, she had outlined a complete transformation of corporate culture and environmental responsibility. There were plans for educational outreach programs, community sustainable housing projects, and a network of innovation centers across the city. "Look at these dates," Alexander noted, pointing to the file timestamps. "She was working on these right up until..." He paused, redirecting his thoughts. "She never stopped believing in what we could become." Thomas opened a document titled Family Legacy. It was a letter addressed to future generations of Morgans, outlining a vision for maintaining the balance between business success and social responsibility. Sarah had included guidelines for leadership transition, emphasizing the importance of maintaining the human connection in corporate decisions. "She thought of everything," Claire said, reading over their shoulders, "even how to prevent the company from losing its way again in the future." A subfolder labeled Thomas's Future contained detailed observations of his childhood development, along with suggestions for nurturing his talents and interests. Sarah had documented every achievement every indication of his emerging engineering abilities, creating a roadmap for his eventual introduction to the family legacy. "She never doubted you would find each other," Claire told Alexander. "Even when I questioned her decisions, she insisted that timing was everything. She said Thomas needed to develop his own strength before he could help you rediscover yours." They spent hours exploring the digital archive, each file revealing new layers of Sarah's careful planning and deep love for her family. There were designs Thomas had drawn as a child, uncannily similar to his father's college sketches. There were business proposals Alexander had written in his early career, full of the idealistic vision that had first attracted Sarah. As evening approached, they found one final video, dated just weeks before Sarah's departure. She sat in this, very steady, looking directly into the camera with a gentle smile. "My dear family," she began, "if you're watching this together, then everything I hoped for has come to pass. Alexander, you've remembered who you were meant to be. Thomas, you've found your place in the world we dreamed of building. And Claire, my devoted friend, you've helped guide them both to this moment." She paused, touching something off-screen, the same desk they now sat around. The Legacy Project isn't just about sustainable buildings or corporate responsibility. It's about sustaining the connections that make life meaningful. The bridges we build between dreams and reality, between past and future, between parent and child. The video ended with Sarah's smile, a moment frozen in time that seemed to fill the study with warmth, despite the growing darkness outside. Alexander reached out, taking Thomas's hand in his right and Claire's in his left. "She gave us a roadmap," he said quietly, "but she also gave us something more important, a reason to follow it together." The transformation of Morgan Tower was progressing faster than anyone had anticipated. The once sterile lobby now featured living walls bursting with greenery, while solar panels glinted on every available surface. But with change came resistance, and not everyone was happy with the new direction. Alexander stood in the boardroom, facing a group of agitated senior executives. Robert Sterling, one of the company's longest-serving vice presidents, was particularly vocal in his opposition. "This has gone far enough, Alexander," Sterling declared, slapping a financial report onto the table. "These green initiatives are eating into our profit margins. The shareholders are getting nervous." "The same shareholders who gave us a standing ovation last month," Alexander replied calmly, thinking of Thomas's presentation and the enthusiasm it had generated. "That was emotional manipulation," Sterling countered. "Bringing your son into this using Sarah's memory to push through these radical changes, it's not good business sense." The room fell silent at the mention of Sarah. Alexander felt a familiar surge of anger, but suppressed it, remembering how Thomas handled confrontation, with patience and understanding rather than force. "Let's look at the actual numbers," he suggested, pulling up the latest project data. "Emily, could you join us, please?" Emily entered the boardroom carrying her tablet. The young engineer had become an invaluable part of the Legacy Project team, her practical expertise helping to bridge the gap between vision and reality. "The initial investment in sustainable systems is significant," Emily acknowledged, displaying charts on the main screen. "But our projections show full cost recovery within 3 years, with increasing returns after that. The Community Power Sharing Initiative alone has generated positive PR worth millions." Sterling scoffed. "PR doesn't pay dividends." "No," came a voice from the doorway, "but innovation does." Thomas stood there, his school backpack still over one shoulder. He hadn't been expected at this meeting, but somehow he had known he would be needed. "Thomas," Alexander started, concerned about involving his son in such a confrontational situation, but Thomas was already moving to the presentation screen, pulling up his own data. "Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice steady, "did you know that 3 major tech companies have already approached us about licensing our solar collection system? The one you called a wasteful experiment last month?" He switched to another screen, showing a series of emails and meeting requests. "Universities want to partner with us on research. Environmental organizations are offering grants. Even our competitors are asking about collaboration opportunities." Sterling shifted uncomfortably. "That's all very nice, but And the Community Innovation Center? Thomas continued, bringing up more data. Local schools are already signing up for the education program. Companies want to rent space for sustainable technology demonstrations. We're creating new revenue streams while building something meaningful. Alexander watched his son with a mixture of pride and amazement. Thomas hadn't just inherited Sarah's vision, he had found ways to make it practically irresistible, even to the most hardened business minds. "The world is changing, Mr. Sterling," Thomas said, his tone respectful but firm. "Companies that don't adapt won't survive." Mom understood that. She knew that real success means growing in the right direction, not just growing bigger. Emily stepped forward, adding her support. "The employees are more engaged than ever. Productivity is up, sick days are down, and our recruitment numbers have doubled since we started the legacy project." Sterling looked around the room, sensing he was losing ground. "The old guard won't accept this easily," he warned. "There will be resistance." "The old guard said the same thing when I started this company," Alexander responded, moving to stand beside his son. "They said sustainable technology was a pipe dream. They said mixing business with environmental responsibility would never work. They were wrong then, and they're wrong now." He placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder, feeling the quiet strength there. "My son reminded me of something important. Success isn't just about what we build, but about how we build it. Sarah knew that. She left us a blueprint for a better way of doing business, and we're finally brave enough to follow it." The room fell silent as Sterling gathered his papers. "This isn't over," he said, heading for the door. "The board will have more questions." "And we'll have answers," Thomas replied confidently. "Real ones backed by data and results. Mum taught me that the best way to handle doubt is to build something so obviously right that even the skeptics have to believe in it." After Sterling left, Emily began clearing away the presentation materials. "He won't be the last one to resist," she warned. "No," Alexander agreed, "but maybe that's not a bad thing. Opposition makes us prove our case more thoroughly, build our solutions more carefully." Thomas was already at the whiteboard, sketching out new ideas. "What if we invited the skeptics to help design the next phase?" he suggested. "Let them see the process from the inside, understand the benefits firsthand." Alexander smiled, recognizing Sarah's gift for turning opponents into allies. "You know what? That's exactly what your mother would have suggested." The Community Innovation Center was scheduled to open in 2 weeks, and the pressure was mounting. Construction crews worked around the clock to complete Sarah's vision, transforming the lower floors of Morgan Tower into a space that blended learning, technology, and natural beauty. But as the deadline approached, unexpected complications arose. "The environmental permits are being challenged," Emily reported during the morning meeting. "Sterling's group has filed objections about the rooftop garden and community access areas." Alexander rubbed his temples, feeling a familiar tension headache building. The resistance from the old guard had evolved from boardroom arguments to legal challenges, each delay threatening to derail their progress. "Can we fight it?" he asked, looking through the stack of legal documents. "We can," Thomas said, entering the conference room with Claire. "Or we can try something different." Since the discovery of Sarah's archives, Thomas had been spending more time at the tower, balancing schoolwork with his increasing involvement in the legacy project. Claire, initially skeptical of his dual role as student and innovator, had become one of their strongest supporters. "Sterling's main argument is about security and liability," Thomas continued, spreading out a new set of drawings. "So let's address those concerns directly. I've been working with the school's engineering club on some ideas." The drawings showed modifications to the rooftop garden design, incorporating advanced security systems that blended seamlessly with the environmental features. Access points were redesigned to improve flow while maintaining control, and educational areas were clearly separated from sensitive corporate spaces. "These are impressive," Emily said, studying the plans, "but can we implement them in time?" "We'll need help," Thomas admitted. "That's why I invited some people to join us." As if on cue, the conference room door opened again. A group of students from Thomas's school entered, followed by their science teacher and, to everyone's surprise, Robert Sterling himself. "Mr. Sterling has been helping us refine the security aspects," Thomas explained, catching his father's startled look. "It turns out he has some interesting ideas about integrating safety features with sustainable design." Sterling looked uncomfortable, but determined. When Thomas showed me how the students were approaching the problems I raised, well, let's just say they made some compelling arguments. The students began presenting their solutions, each one addressing a specific concern that Sterling's group had raised. They had clearly done their homework, backing up their proposals with research and practical considerations. "The thing is, Dad," Thomas said quietly while the others examined the plans, "sometimes the biggest opponents can become the strongest allies. They just need to feel heard and involved." Alexander watched as Sterling engaged with the students, his years of security expertise helping to refine their innovative ideas. The man who had been their strongest critic was now fully engaged in making the project work, his objections transformed into constructive improvements. "Sarah would have loved this," Claire murmured, standing beside them. "She always said the best solutions come from bringing different perspectives together." The meeting extended into the afternoon, with Sterling's security expertise blending surprisingly well with the students' creative approaches. By the end, they had a revised plan that satisfied both safety concerns and environmental goals. "I still have reservations," Sterling admitted as the meeting concluded. "But," he glanced at the students gathering their materials, "maybe it's time I learned to see things from a different angle." After the others had left, Alexander found Thomas staring out the window at the city below. The sun was setting, casting long shadows between the buildings and highlighting the new solar panels that now adorned neighboring structures, companies that had been inspired by Morgan Tower's transformation. "How did you know?" Alexander asked. "About Sterling?" Thomas smiled, a gesture that reminded him so much of Sarah. Mom's journals mentioned that some of the strongest environmental initiatives in her college days came from former skeptics. She wrote that people who question the most deeply often become the most committed once they understand the vision. Alexander looked at his son with newfound appreciation. "You're not just building sustainable systems, are you? You're building sustainable relationships." "That's what Mom wanted," Thomas replied. "The Legacy Project isn't just about green technology or corporate responsibility. It's about bringing people together, helping them see that we can all be part of something bigger than ourselves." As they stood together watching the city lights come on, Alexander realized that Sarah's greatest legacy wasn't the building plans or environmental systems. It was their son, who had inherited her ability to see the best in people and bring it out in unexpected ways. The grand opening of the Morgan Legacy Innovation Center was scheduled for sunrise, Sarah's favorite time of day. Alexander stood in the transformed atrium, watching the first rays of light filter through the solar collecting windows, creating patterns on the living walls that seemed to dance with life. The space was everything she had envisioned, and more, a perfect blend of nature, technology, and human connection. "The first school groups will be here in an hour," Emily reported, tablet in hand as she conducted final checks. "Everything's ready in the educational wing, and the rooftop garden tours are set to begin at 9. Alexander nodded, but his attention was focused on Thomas, who stood in the center of the atrium, making final adjustments to what had become the heart of the project. An interactive holographic display that told the story of the Legacy Project's evolution. "Is it working properly?" Alexander asked, joining his son. Thomas stepped back, watching as images flickered to life around them. Sarah's original designs floated in the air, morphing smoothly into their realized forms. Photographs of the building's transformation played alongside clips of community members and employees sharing their experiences. "Mom would have loved this part," Thomas said softly, reaching out to touch a holographic blueprint, causing it to expand and reveal detailed annotations. "She always said that every building tells a story. We're just making sure this one tells the right one." The sound of footsteps drew their attention to the entrance, where Claire arrived with a surprise. A group of Thomas's former classmates from his old school in Boston, all wearing t-shirts with the Legacy Project logo. They insisted on being here, Claire explained, smiling at Thomas's shocked expression. "They've been following all the news about the project. One of the students, a girl named Jenny, stepped forward. "We've been implementing some of your ideas at our school," she told Thomas excitedly. "The solar panel design you shared. We modified it for our science building. It's already reduced the school's energy bills by 30%. Before Thomas could respond, more visitors began arriving. Emily's engineering team, dressed formally for the occasion, mingled with maintenance staff who had been crucial in implementing the changes. Students from Thomas's new school filed in, followed by their teachers and parents. Even Robert Sterling appeared, looking slightly out of place, but determined to show his support. The atrium filled with excited conversations as people explored the new space. The living walls, now fully mature, created a sense of being in a vertical forest. Solar-powered lights adjusted automatically to maintain optimal growing conditions, while hidden sensors monitored air quality and temperature. "Mr. Morgan?" A small voice caught Alexander's attention. A young girl, perhaps 7 or 8, stood before him with a drawing in her hands. "I drew this for the time capsule. Thomas said we could add our own visions of the future." Alexander accepted the drawing, which showed Morgan Tower surrounded by other buildings, connected by what appeared to be sky bridges made of plants. "It's beautiful," he said sincerely. "Would you like to explain it to me?" As the girl enthusiastically described her idea for connecting city buildings with elevated gardens, Alexander caught sight of Thomas speaking with a group of corporate executives from other companies. His son was in his element, explaining how the legacy project's innovations could be adapted for different buildings and businesses. "He's a natural leader," Claire said, joining Alexander. "Just like his mother, he knows how to make people believe in possibilities." The morning sun had fully risen now, filling the atrium with golden light that seemed to make the entire space glow. Alexander watched as Thomas moved through the crowd, connecting people with similar interests, sharing ideas, and ensuring everyone felt included, just as Sarah would have done. "We did it," Alexander said softly, more to himself than to Claire. "We actually built her dream." Claire touched his arm gently. "No, Alexander, you and Thomas did more than that. You took her dream and made it grow into something even bigger than she imagined." As if to emphasize her words, the holographic display shifted to show the latest addition to the project, a network of similar innovation centers planned for cities across the country, each one built on the principles Sarah had established and the improvements Thomas had developed. The legacy project had become more than a single building's transformation. It was now a movement, spreading from city to city, company to company, sparked by the vision of a woman who believed in the power of connecting hearts and minds, and brought to life by the son who inherited her gift for bringing people together. Thomas rejoined them, his eyes bright with excitement. "Dad, you won't believe what some of the other companies are planning. They want to create a network of sustainable innovation hubs, all connected and sharing resources. It's like Mom's community power-sharing idea, but on a global scale." Alexander pulled his son into a tight hug, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they had achieved together. "She would be so proud of you," he whispered, "of all of this." Thomas hugged him back, then stepped away with a familiar, determined expression. "It's almost time for the official opening," he said. "Are you ready?" Alex